Hello! Today I'm continuing my series on Final Fantasy summons with a look at Bahamut, one of the most prominent creatures to emerge from the summonable deities in Final Fantasy's unique pantheon. Now, where most Final Fantasy summons that draw upon existent mythologies and folklore lend themselves to some degree to their source material, with Ifrit being comprised of fire, or Odin wielding Gungnir and riding on Sleipnir, or Titan emerging from the ground as if from Tartarus, Bahamut, by comparison, has taken on a life of its own, and while it is an existent beast that has gone by varying names and filtered down into numerous cultures and mythologies, it's interesting to observe how the Final Fantasy series has taken it out of its origins, making it, for all intents and purposes, the king of the summons in this particular pantheon. And we can chart this course from its first summonable appearance in Final Fantasy III, all the way through to its domineering chief deity status in Final Fantasy XV. But turning first to the muddled history of Bahamut and looking at the origins of the creature, it emerges out of ancient Arabic and Persian creation stories, and quite to the contrary of it being an overtly dragon-esque creature, it's presented as a whale-like beast, so gargantuan that it cannot be perceived or observed by the human eye. And as with many creation stories, it is part of a primordial hierarchy of beings that props up the earth. So we have the whale-like Bahamut existing as one of the lower layers, and upon its back we have the bull Kajata, which also features as a Final Fantasy summon. And upon Kajata we have a mountain, and atop the mountain we have an angel who holds the earth upon its shoulders. So another of those bizarre and fascinating creation myths that we've documented while looking at the summons thus far, and something perhaps familiar because it does dissipate into other stories, and any fans of Terry Pratchett and the Discworld series might note the similarities in this hierarchy of creatures that props up the earth. But turning specifically to Bahamut, over time this creature has filtered down into various other texts, and through misinterpretation, etymological mishap, and various other things over time, it has become conflated into both Leviathan and also Behemoth, particularly in the Old Testament, and there's much debate as to how and why this might have happened. And some theologians argue that Kajata the bull is actually Behemoth, and some argue that Bahamut and Behemoth are one and the same. Some argue that Bahamut is Leviathan, and so on. It's a very muddled history that has varying answers depending on what you read. Now, a latter-day development of these beasts, which is quite uncommon for the summons that we've discussed thus far, but where they've started as these relatively elemental foundational aspects of ancient cultures. With Bahamut in particular, we have the advent of RPG gaming, and particularly Dungeons & Dragons, which appropriated everything from Tolkien's Middle-earth creatures to biblical creatures and all sorts of things. And this in turn inspired and filtered into the transition from tabletop RPG gaming into video RPG gaming. And looking specifically at Final Fantasy, there is a heavy D&D influence, particularly if we look at the earliest games. So, looking at how Bahamut was featured in Dungeons & Dragons, this is the first time that it was ever depicted as a dragon rather than a whale or a bull, and its moniker, since the early 1980s in D&D, has been the Dragon King. So, looking to Final Fantasy I, where Bahamut features as an NPC dragon, and later Final Fantasy III, where it became a summonable dragon, we can see the similarities here, not to mention, as we've discussed, that it became a revered king-like figure in the mythos of Final Fantasy as well, starting as early as Final Fantasy IV, and most prominently and recently in Final Fantasy XV. Beyond this, Bahamut also stands a little bit more distinct as a summon, because it features a little more in story than its counterparts, or if not a little more in story, then at the very least a summon that's slightly harder to acquire, whether that's battling him to prove yourself, or doing slightly harder tasks in order to unlock it. For example, beyond Final Fantasy IV and XV, as we've mentioned, we have the child, the Fayth, that periodically appears to Tidus from the beginning of Final Fantasy X, which is of course Bahamut. It features in a pretty cool number of cutscenes in Final Fantasy IX, displaying its awesome power, and in other titles such as Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy VIII, it's acquired by beating a difficult opponent, such as the Red Dragon in the Temple of the Ancients, or defeating Bahamut himself in Final Fantasy VIII in the Deep Sea Research Facility. So, In all, I love how, despite its non-hostile, non-dragon origins, Square have raised Bahamut up and repackaged it to become this uniquely revered and feared deity in its own right across these JRPG games. And of course, also in supplementary material like Advent Children, where it also features as a penultimate boss battle too. And personally speaking, of all of its inclusions, I really loved Final Fantasy VII's trio of increasingly powerful Bahamuts, with Neo Bahamut and Bahamut Zero involved too. But again, I think it's just a testament to the attention that's offered to this summon over the others, how it stands distinct among its peers within Final Fantasy, which, finally, as discussed in my recent Phoenix episode, it does open up some intriguing debate into Final Fantasy XVI, because while Phoenix and Ifrit have been the focal point for discussion thus far, particularly with regards to Clive and Joshua, and of course they're featuring in the logo and key events based on that, it's interesting to consider where Bahamut slots into this, and whether, once again, it resides at the top spot as an ultimate acquisition or obstacle to overcome within the summons in this game. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to see. So there we have it, some brief thoughts on the prevailing summon of Bahamut within the realms of Final Fantasy. If you got this far, thanks very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And feel free to drop a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on Bahamut and its status among the summons of Final Fantasy.